Welcome to Globewatch with me, Charles Ebune, aired today from one of the external services of the U.S. State Department. Next, August 5, Barack Obama welcomes in Washington, D.C. African leaders in the first ever U.S.-Africa Summit. According to the White House Press Secretary, Jay Carney, the encounter will permit U.S. and the African governments to discuss relations and more particularly to strengthen bilateral cooperation between Africa, one of the world's fastest growing regions, and the world's most powerful nation, the United States of America. For that to happen, public diplomacy must be at work at the highest level. My guest today is one directly concerned with the execution of that mission, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs at the U.S. State Department. David Gilmour, welcome to Globewatch.
Thank you, Charles. Nice to be here.
Can you quickly tell my viewers what takes a top U.S. diplomat from the sumptuous buildings in Washington, D.C. to Africa at this particular time of the year, more precisely to Central Africa?
Okay. Well, I work in the Bureau of African Affairs of the U.S. State Department, so we are charged with the diplomatic relations with all the countries of all of Africa, but my particular dossier is Central Africa. So I work for the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, and she in turn, of course, works for Secretary of State John Kerry. So we are his advisors on Africa, and I am charged with Central Africa, which is why I'm here to visit with people here in Cameroon.
Why this particular time of the year? Chad and Cameroon, what are the subjects of interest at this particular time of the year?
Well, I've recently taken on this portfolio about 3 months ago. So I'm in the process of visiting all the countries of the region to meet with leaders and gauge their views on all kinds of questions, because of course there are many important issues we have to deal with regarding Central Africa. Sure,
there are so many issues, but which are the most pressing one for the U.S. administration at this particular hour? I think the traditional ones, democracy, human rights.
Those are certainly all important. As you know, President Obama has a strategy for Africa with 4 pillars, 4 areas of priority. And so these are things that we work with all across the continent. Those 4 pillars are promoting democracy in Africa, encouraging economic growth and greater trade with the United States, ensuring the security of the region, and that has to do with things like peacekeeping and countering terrorism, and then finally what we call promoting opportunity and development, which are development and aid issues. So we're always engaged in those activities all across the continent. I would say particularly at this moment in Central Africa, we're certainly very concerned about regional security issues. So that's been a topic on our minds, and then as I've come to speak with leaders in the region, they are very concerned.
You are talking about security, and in Central Africa currently there is one hotspot area, which is the Central African Republic, with all the chaotic situation. Is it fair for some people who have described the Central African Republic as Barack Obama's Rwanda?
Well, I think our concern from the beginning in the situation in Central African Republic is that we don't want to see a situation of mass atrocities, and I think that is what has driven a large part of the concern in the United States about this, and has pressed us to act.
How often do you discuss the Central African Republic now at the U.S. State Department back in Washington? Is it really a hot potato issue? Every day?
It's an important issue.
And what are the strategies being taken by the Obama administration to quell the tension in the Central African Republic? Because months back, when the conflict escalated, I saw your ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Powers, there. What is the situation now?
Well, as I say, we've been very concerned about mass violence, and so we wanted to do what we could as fast as possible to assist, in particular, African peacekeeping forces on the ground. There have been a number of African peacekeepers there for a while, So we wanted to help strengthen that effort. Do
you want to contribute soldiers to the
well,
Central African
our
Republic?
contribution is primarily one of support for the African forces.
What kind of support?
Well, the African Union is has shown very strong leadership in confronting the problem there. So there was initially a force of the ECAS countries, Central African governments, and so we wanted to support that. But then in turn,
financially or materially, or in terms of personnel?
Certainly both. Yeah, financially and materially. In early December, the ECAS force transitioned to an African Union force. And so about that time, we came forward to airlift in additional soldiers from Rwanda and from Burundi. So there are now more peacekeepers on the ground there. And we also provided a lot of material to those troops. And of course, Cameroon has peacekeepers there and has had for some time. And then we are also supporting the French effort, which began also.
In Libya, it was the same thing. The Central African Republic, the same thing. Syria, the same thing. Afghanistan, there is a pull out. Why is it that the U.S. administration is gradually disengaging from the world? Or you are following what your Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel, has said, because there will be a downsizing of the U.S. military?
Well, I think every country, every situation, has different requirements. And, we feel that our best contribution in most cases in Africa are to provide material support, financial support, and then also training, very important. For many, many years we've been providing training for peacekeepers across Africa. That began in the 1990s because we feel that African troops can do the best job in these situations because, clearly troops from the region will know the cultural situations, will know the people, will know the geography better than Americans.
Certainly, the lessons from Afghanistan have influenced a redefinition of American politics
I think
in that area.
This predates Afghanistan. This has been our policy in Africa for a long time, is to support African peacekeepers. So we work with countries all over the continent to build their capacity, and to to not only participate in peacekeeping operations in Africa, but even beyond Africa.
The financial situation back home is not the best for the U.S. administration. You are suffering from problems of government shutdown, of recent, there are some 77 embassies of the United States across the world today without an ambassador because of financial and mistrust maybe between Congress and the White House. You say that you want to send, you'll be giving support to the Central African Republic. Concretely, I want our audience to retain what palpable are you going to do in the Central African Republic? Because if you talk to all 8 agencies, to all those involved, they will tell you that it is a catastrophic humanitarian situation.
No, we've since the beginning of December, we've contributed about $100 million of aid. And that is in large part supporting the MISCA peacekeeping troops that are there, and also in support of the French for things like airlift to bring the peacekeeping soldiers there, providing materials, protective gear for the troops, providing trucks and ambulances. So very solid material support. Also a very large amount of humanitarian aid. Both bilaterally, that we give, and then also through the UN humanitarian agencies. Of course, multilateral. The United States, of course, is the largest contributor in the world to all of the UN agencies. So we pay about between 25% and 30% of those of those costs. So so those agencies are largely supported by the United States. And so those are agencies like UNHCR that looks after all the refugees. Of course, Cameroon has welcomed tens of thousands of refugees that have come over the border from CAR and is working closely with agencies like UNHCR to take care of those people. Let's
talk another area of concern which brings you to Africa, democracy and human rights promotion. And let me go straight away to Uganda.
Okay.
Yoweri Museveni has promulgated into law and enacted a very controversial anti-gay bill. That is to some people. And immediately that decision was taken, the World Bank stalled or postponed a $90 billion package to the Yoweri Museveni government. And Secretary of State John Kerry has described Mr. Museveni's decision as an atrocity and has likened it to anti-Semitism and apartheid laws in South Africa. Annually, your government, the U.S. administration, provides Uganda with some $400 million. Are you going to take the steps of the World Bank?
Well, I think we'll be reviewing our options on that. The Secretary said, we're not pleased to see the passage of this law. For the United States and many other countries, this is an issue of human rights, and then we believe that no one should be discriminated against, or they should certainly not be a victim of violence because of who they are or whom they love. So it's a question of basic human rights, and we recognize this as a problem across the world. I saw something the other day that there are something like 80 countries in the world. So
Uganda should be expecting a complete cut of American aid because of...
I can't say what possible changes there might be. I don't know that. And I think that's still being reviewed in Washington.
Okay, now...
But it's certainly, this is a human rights issue, and all countries... All governments have a responsibility to protect the rights of their citizens and to make sure that all their citizens are treated equally. And it's certainly a commitment that all governments have based on international agreements, based on their own laws, and which I think is the case certainly in Uganda, that their constitution guarantees equal protection under the law, as it is in the United States, and then also international obligations. Most countries in the world.
This is equally an issue of democracy because
it is.
I'm sure that if Ugandans go in for an election to decide whether homosexuality should be legalized or not, I am sure that one man, one vote, a majority of Ugandans will vote for the non-legalization of homosexuality. This is an issue of democracy, and I'm sure Washington is going to approve that decision. Are you comfortable with the Ugandan government organizing an election? Transparent, one man, one vote. What if the population says yes to homosexuality? What will you people do then?
Well, that's up to Ugandans to organize elections or referendums or however they want to do that. But we've made our position quite clear on this.
Okay, let's go to the next coming U.S.-Africa summit. I understand that there are 47 leaders from Africa to whom the State Department has extended invitations. There are 54 countries, which means that those who do not have invitations belong to the U.S. blacklist. Who are they? Those who have not been given invitations. I need to know them.
Well, we've said that we would not extend invitations to leaders of countries that are not in good standing with the African Union or are not in good standing with the United States in terms of sanctions or things like that. I think it's well known who those leaders are.
So the category of those who have spent so many years in power, those with terrible human rights records, will not be moving to Washington. Is that part?
If they're not in good standing with the African Union or are under any sort of sanction with the United States, they are not invited to the summit.
Let's talk U.S.-Africa trade relations. There has been a progressive improvement of bilateral trade transactions. Let me just read to you some statistics. Sub-Saharan Africa, this is trade for last year, was $72 billion in 2012, and exports total $22 billion. Goods imports total $49 million. This has been progressive. What accounts for this rapid change of U.S. trade in Africa? Certainly you want to replace the Chinese because this is a safe haven for the Chinese for the moment.
Well, I mean, I think the United States, like many countries, are seeing opportunities in Africa that have not been here before. This is, I've been working my entire career, which is 28 years, in and out of Africa, and to me this is the most exciting time I've seen in my entire career in terms of Africa's growth and development. So the possibilities are greater now than ever, and that's a result of good management on the part of many African governments. African governments have made macroeconomic reforms that have been necessary. They've made it easier for businesses to come and invest, and we're seeing the results of that now, and it's very positive. So we're seeing very rapid growth across the continent. Of course, everyone knows the famous statistic that 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa right now. So I think American business people see that, as do Chinese and Brazilian and European. Everyone sees that. So I think that's great news for Africa. People are being lifted out of poverty. So we're very excited to be a part of that.
What do you think is the principal hurdle to growth and economic stability in most parts of Africa? You have worked extensively on the continent.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a number of things, and I mentioned before President Obama's 4 principal goals for Africa: democracy, economic growth, security, and opportunity. Those first 2 of those, the democracy and economic growth, we feel those kind of go together. They're kind of equal status. Because obviously you have to take measures like I just described, macroeconomic controls. The governments can't spend more money than they have, and they can't get themselves into deep debt like we saw in the 80s and 90s. So there has to be discipline in spending and fiscal measures and things like that. But at the same time, there have to be democracy measures, at least in terms of if you want to have long, sustainable growth. You have to have a parliament that is transparent and passes laws. You have to have balance of powers. You have to have a judicial system that's fair. So when people come and invest their money, if they have a dispute, a commercial dispute, they can go and have their case judged fairly, without any problems. So people have to have confidence in the system. So those are the elements that will attract investment and bring it to a country and have sustained long-term growth.
But you know that there is one major challenge, and that is the avalanche of militancy in Africa, which is going to compromise all of that. Mm-hmm. You set up the Trans-Saharan counter-terrorism strategy. Today, on a daily basis, Nigeria suffers from the hands of Boko Haram, and you know what you get from Nigeria in terms of oil because of the Gulf of Guinea corridor. Somalia is not the best. The Central African corridor, which was like a safe passage along the River Congo, is increasingly being threatened. The whole of East Africa has problems around the Somali waters. How can the U.S. administration help solve this problem? Mm-hmm. Because most African countries, as you know, are not ready to provide a base for the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM.
Well, I mean, we recognize that this is a problem, but I think more importantly, the leadership of Africa realizes that it's a problem. And that's why I think we're so pleased to see the strong leadership coming from the African Union on these questions. The African Union forces in Somalia, for example, you bring that up, that's something that the United States has supported strongly with funding and
Since
training.
1992, it's not been working.
Well, right, but, we can say because of the strong will of the African Union and the strong leadership of countries in the region, Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, those who have sent peacekeeping troops to Somalia, for the first time last year, after 20 years of a failed state, we now had democratic elections in Somalia. Somalia's got the beginnings of a democratic government. It's beginning to come back. So, that's an amazing thing. We're proud that we were able to support that, but the leadership, the important leadership and the people who have been on the ground doing the job are the countries of the region, Ethiopia, Kenya, Burundi. That's a tremendous change and a tremendously positive one. So we are pleased to see that, and we want to see more of that. And I think, the important thing there is that no one has more at stake in solving these conflicts than Africans do. Because as you say, Africa is growing very quickly and having lots of economic success in many areas, but nothing will stop that quicker than conflict. And you mentioned Nigeria too. Nigeria is not even so much, certainly the oil that the United States and other countries get from Nigeria is very important. It's very important for Nigeria's income. But also Nigeria is an economic powerhouse that can drive growth and development throughout the region. So it's important for the entire region of Africa that the conflict in Nigeria be solved. And there it's a thorny problem. We've urged the Nigerian government to take a comprehensive approach. And we say that the solution to the Boko Haram problem is not a purely military one. That there has to be a comprehensive approach. That people in the north need to be engaged. That social services need to come to the north, which has historically been a very underserved part of Nigeria. So it's a very important conflict.
About 3 minutes into the program, you talked about opportunities for Africans to be provided by the U.S. administration. I know that one program which the government or the Obama presidency is managing currently to change leadership setup in Africa is YALI. Where are we with the project?
That's a very exciting project. President Obama launched the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, actually about 3 years ago. In 2010, he invited a group of young African leaders to the White House for a summit meeting. That was about 120 young leaders, just to show that he's interested in the next generation of Africa, and that young people have very much, great things to contribute, both in the public and the private sector. And so he has continued that since that time, a lot of engagement with Africa. When he traveled to Africa last June, he did a continent-wide telecast where we connected him with television stations in Kenya and Uganda and Nigeria, and that was broadcast across the continent. And he met with young leaders there in South Africa, and that was broadcast out. So he's very interested in talking to young people in Africa. And then this past year, on that same trip, he announced the new what we call the Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders, which is the newest element of this initiative. And it's very exciting. This will bring 500 young leaders from across the continent will come to Washington, come to the United States this summer in June of this year for leadership training at 20 leading American universities. This will be a 6-week session, a 6-week institute, where they will receive leadership training from the best university level schools, and then they will come together in Washington for a summit meeting with the president following that, and then there will also be opportunities for internships following that. So it's a very exciting program. It's going to be a long-term program that will last for several years. So it's our way to build connections between the United States and young people of Africa, and kind of help give them skills to as they move into positions of leadership.
All of this is between the context of bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. Let me take you to Kenya, where President Barack Obama's father came from. He was not an Afro-American, he was an African. Barack Obama has made 2 trips to Africa. You are part of the African department that advises the president on his African strategy. He has made 2 trips to Africa without a stopover in Kenya. In August, African leaders will be moving to Washington to meet and chart a way forward for relations between Washington, D.C. and the entire continent. The Kenyan president has problems with the International Criminal Court, the ICC, but has very excellent relations with the African Union. Obama has not been in Kenya. Is Uhuru Kenyatta part of those who have been invited to Washington, if it is not a secret?
I believe he has, but yes, as far as I know.
He is part of those who have been invited?
I believe so.
Now, let me ask you a question which has to do with U.S. global policy. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel has announced plans to slash down the American military from where it is today, about 520,000 ground troops, to about 400,000 something. That is the biggest downsizing of the U.S. military since the end of World War II. I read some statistics a few years ago when Farid Zakaria was doing a program, that is somebody you know so well on CNN, that America's educational standing is at 52% today. The fastest and the most complicated computer was developed in 2009, around that period, in China. today when there is a problem, like it is in Ukraine, instead of people calling Washington to look for a problem, it is Washington calling others. You know how Edward Snowden has damaged America's global standings. With all these fall downs of American diplomacy, can you have the courage to tell me that when Washington sneezes, the world can still catch a cold?
Well, I think we see in crises across the world that the United States...
This is probably a yes or no question, Mr. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Can you say confidently that if Washington sneezes today, the world can still catch a cold?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily phrase it that way, but what I would say is that the United States still plays a very leading role. And I think
if Washington sneezes, can the world catch a cold?
Well, I wouldn't phrase it that way. I would say that the United States plays a strong leadership role in the world, and I think that's evident in every. And I think the crisis in Ukraine right now is a good example. But it's also instructive too. The United States doesn't act alone in the world, and in the case of Ukraine, we're seeing. You saw the very strong statement issued yesterday by the G7.
You are telling me that the U.S. is no longer a superpower?
The U.S. is certainly a superpower.
The Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs at the U.S. State Department, David Gilmour, thanks very much for accepting to be guest on our program today.
Thank you, Charles. It was a pleasure.
Okay, and when you go back to Washington, you greet your boss, Robert P. Jackson, who was a pioneer guest on this program.
I will. Thank you.
Okay.